Well, I think one has to start with what are the core objectives of learning and development. And there are two core objectives that, irrespective of the sector or the environment, heads of learning have to focus on. The first, of course, is to add value to the business. It's to align what they do with the business objectives, to help to enhance the capability of the organisation, to build capability, and with performance in mind, you know. And the second one, the second objective really is to create, help the organisation to move towards being a learning organisation culturally. And that is so important today because the only real competitive differentiator for any organisation today is how fast the organisation can learn. Can it learn faster than the competition? And that requires a whole cultural top-down approach to create the framework or the necessary requirements, the culture, if you like, for a learning organisation to develop. And learning and development has a key part in that role. So if that's what we say the objectives are, then when we talk to heads of learning, we find that we have three central challenges today, which are fairly common across the board. Obviously, every organisation has different proprietary requirements, but let's look at the three generic ones that we're finding. The first one is the challenge of engaging with line managers and the management structure of an organisation. You see, the thing is that the training function cannot on itself achieve those two objectives we've just mentioned. It needs to be part of a collaborative approach. And that collaborative approach needs to involve managers at all levels. You see, what we need is not just training courses for training's sake. We need to create a learning transfer system in an organisation. Systematic approach to skills transfer and knowledge transfer. Just putting people on training courses and letting them go back to work afterwards when they put the course manual on the shelf and every now and again they'll get it down and dust it, but they've not taken any real note of it. It's been a nice little exercise, but it hasn't really affected how they do things. That is all too common. And so therefore the challenge is to involve managers in a learning transfer system before an event, identifying whether it's really a training need, identifying what the objectives of the learning are going to be, how they're going to be assessed, how they're going to be measured, agreeing with the learners before they go on the course what they're hoping to achieve out of it, what their key objectives are for the job, what they'll bring back to their workplace, and then afterwards to review that learning with the delegates so that they can establish how much of that learning is being transferred into the workplace. That becomes a learning transfer system, and it needs to be a cultural thing, a systematic thing through an organisation, and all too few organisations have actually got that in place. So the challenge for L&D managers is how do we achieve that in our organisation? How do we change the culture to involve managers more? See, the analogy would be the business partners that HR have had for the last 10, 15 years. And in that event, what happened was that HR decided that they wanted to offload to line managers what we call tea and toilets, all the standard HR stuff that managers can do and that HR don't have to do. And to help them to achieve that and to develop those abilities, business partners were created as a concept to work with the business units and to work with line managers. Well, L&D managers are needing to look at the same kind of model today now. They need to look at a consultative model rather than a transactional model for training. They need to be able to work with the line and to answer those to questions that I raised and to meet those objectives that I raised. So that needs a whole bunch of new skills for trainers. They're no longer just standing up and delivering training. They're now looking at consultancy skills. They're looking at how to manage stakeholders, how to negotiate with stakeholders as to whether something is really a training need or not, rather than just be told to go and do something. So those consultancy skills are raising the stakes for heads of learning. They've got to get those through their teams, if you like, to engage with managers effectively. That I see is the first challenge, which we're hearing a lot about. And the second challenge is really aligned to that because it's about the reducing resources that L&D managers are now being given to do that job and to do their jobs. According to our research, more than 80% of organisations have cut the training budgets since the recession started in 2008. So more with less is the mantra. You have to produce more with less. But the needs are not reducing, it's just the resources that are reducing. The needs are actually increasing. So what we're seeing is that L&D managers are being swamped with tactical needs, core competence needs for training, which is reasonable that they address those, but what it means is they have zero time or very little time to address the key issue that I've just mentioned, engaging with managers, developing leadership skills for managers, developing managers to be effective leaders of their teams, engaging with their teams and developing their teams. That is a key challenge for L&D, which is having to go by the board in many cases because they don't have the resources available to do that. There's one other challenge that I think sort of perhaps even fits above all of those, and that is that we have a major engagement issue in the UK. Employee engagement is at very low levels for a number of reasons, particularly in certain sectors. Finance, for example, we're seeing pretty big disengagement areas in levels in most banks and some insurance companies and so forth. We're also seeing pretty high disengagement across the public sector with the austerity program and the cuts that people have experienced or will be experiencing. Of course, you cannot engage your customers if you don't have engaged employees. So the number one agenda item for most CEOs today is to improve engagement with their people. And L&D has a very important challenge to face with that too, because if you are a disengaged worker and you go on a training course, you're not going to leave that disengaged attitude behind when you walk through the door and be full of the joys of spring and ready to learn, are you? You're going to bring that negativity and some of that disengagement with you. So that gives the trainers additional challenges. How to engage with learners, how to engage their hearts and minds to be ready for a learning experience. And that is heightened by the fact that today in the workplace you have probably 5 generations as the working lives become longer for people. It's often now that you find 5 generations in a single team. You have the baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, sometimes older than baby boomers, born before 1947. And then in more recent times you have what they're calling Gen Z, which is born much more recently. And they're all bringing different attitudes and perspectives to learning to the table. They're all learning in different ways and have different preferences for learning. So the trainer and the L&D function has to deal with those different priorities and different preferences. The Gen Z is also being called the I generation because it's iPhone, iTunes, iPad. As somebody said to me the other day, the only I that they don't have is eye contact. And that is often the case. The social skills and the communication skills of the younger generation perhaps are going to need addressing by education and training in the next few years. And of course the trainers that are trying to develop these younger people are going to need to find ways of dealing with that situation as well, helping them to develop their social skills. So these, I think, are what we're hearing. There's massive change going on out there in the L&D world, as always, and it does require heads of learning and development to really keep abreast of movement, of change, trend developments, of the generational developments, but above all, I think, of the need to move towards a learning organisation. And the learning organisation has 5 characteristics, according to Peter Seng, the originator of the concept of the learning organisation. We have to encourage people to develop personal mastery in their own field. So take responsibility for their learning and professional development themselves. Then we have to encourage teams to share their knowledge and skills. So we have team learning. That's the second characteristic. The third one would be for the heads of learning and the heads of organisations to develop a shared vision, a shared mission of what we're trying to achieve in this team or this organisation that everybody can be aligned to and work towards. Then you have the concept of mental models that everybody can share and have a clear understanding of how to achieve what the objectives are. And the final one, of course, is systems thinking, which is often in very short supply in organisations. Most organisations are silo-driven still today, with silo departments, not often communicating effectively with each other, making decisions that will downstream affect another function in an adverse way without knowing that impact, what the knock-on impact is. So developing within an organisation a systems thinking approach, helping everybody to understand that whatever they do today will affect somebody else tomorrow. That is how you move towards a learning organisation. And heads of learning need to take a leading role in developing that changing culture as we move forward.